15 days. No power, no water, no food that lasts more than a few hours. And it's not a natural disaster. It's a policy. Right now, 11 million people on an island 90 miles from Florida are living through what the United Nations is calling a full humanitarian catastrophe. And most people still have no idea how we got here or how much worse it's about to get. Stay with me, because the part nobody's covering is what this means for the rest of the world. I've been tracking this story daily, and the details are more disturbing than the headlines suggest. If you care about what's really happening, hit that like button right now so this reaches people who need to see it. Here's where it started. On February 28, 2026, the last oil tanker offloaded at Havana's port, 180,000 barrels of crude, enough to keep Cuba's aging power plants running for roughly 2 weeks. 3 days later, the Trump administration announced sweeping new sanctions targeting any vessel or company that transported oil to Cuba. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters the measures would hold until democratic reforms were implemented. No timeline, no benchmarks, no clear definition of what reform was even supposed to look like. The impact didn't take long. By March 10th, Cuba's National Electric Union reported fuel reserves had hit critical levels. Power generation fell to 60% of national demand. Rolling blackouts that were already a daily reality in most provinces got worse. Havana went dark for 6-hour stretches. Santiago de Cuba saw blackouts lasting up to 14 hours. And this is the part that should stop you cold, because what happened next wasn't a slow decline. It was a cliff. On March 15th, the Antonio Guterres plant, Cuba's single largest power facility, ran completely out of fuel and shut down. Within hours, the entire national grid collapsed. From one end of the island to the other, 11 million people lost power simultaneously. Not during a war, not after a hurricane, after a decision made in a meeting room thousands of miles away. Now here's what I want you to understand, because this is the question the mainstream coverage keeps skipping. The United States has applied economic pressure to Cuba for 65 years. 65 years. And in all that time, not one of those measures produced the democratic outcome Washington promised. So what makes this time different? And if the answer is nothing, then who exactly is this policy designed to hurt? The humanitarian numbers coming out of Cuba right now are staggering. The International Red Cross reported on March 16th that Cuban hospitals are operating at just 30% capacity. Surgical procedures have been postponed unless classified as immediately life-threatening. Dialysis patients are receiving treatments on reduced schedules, a slow-motion death sentence for thousands. In Havana alone, 2.1 million residents have gone without running water for stretches exceeding 48 hours. Families are collecting rainwater, lining up at emergency distribution points that are themselves running dry. Food preservation has effectively collapsed. Cuba's tropical heat destroys perishables within hours without refrigeration. One Havana resident told The Guardian, "We eat what we can find when we can find it." Sanitation systems are failing in urban neighborhoods because sewage pumps need electricity to run. Public health officials are now warning of potential disease outbreaks, gastrointestinal infections, vector-borne illnesses, the kind of secondary crises that kill long after the cameras stop rolling. The economy has buckled in parallel. Factories are shut. Tourism, one of Cuba's last sources of hard currency, has effectively stopped. Hotels cannot guarantee electricity or clean water to guests. The Cuban peso has lost 40% of its value against the dollar on informal markets since the crisis began. Amnesty International declared a severe humanitarian emergency on March 14th and called for immediate international action. The Trump administration's response has been firm and consistent. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated at a March 12th briefing that the sanctions are pressure on the Cuban government, not its people. Secretary Rubio speaking on March 17th in Miami, went further, placing responsibility entirely on the Cuban regime, arguing it chooses repression over the welfare of its citizens. Congressional Republicans have largely backed that framing. Senator Rick Scott called economic pressure the only language dictatorships understand. Critics on the other side are equally sharp. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wrote on March 15th that cutting off oil doesn't punish a government. It punishes children who need dialysis and families who need clean water. The European Union issued a statement expressing grave concern. Mexico offered to mediate. Canada pledged medical supplies and portable generators. Brazil's President Lula called the sanctions inhumane. Russia condemned them as economic aggression and offered fuel shipments, though the United States warned that any nation assisting Cuba could face secondary financial penalties, effectively deterring most commercial shippers. And this is where the story gets bigger than Cuba. Because that warning, ship oil to Cuba and lose access to U.S. financial systems, is a demonstration of something that goes far beyond one island. It's a proof of concept. Energy as a weapon, not sanctions in the traditional sense, a deliberate severing of the physical fuel supply to a civilian population. And if it works here, the question that every foreign policy analyst should be asking is, where does it get used next? Venezuela? Nicaragua? Whoever comes after that? Here's what we know with certainty. Cuba has been without a functioning electrical grid for 15 days. Hospitals are running without reliable power, and patients are dying. Millions of people have no access to clean water or refrigerated food. The Trump administration imposed these conditions deliberately and has signaled no intention to reverse course. 65 years of pressure have never produced the outcome Washington promised, and the people suffering most have no vote in the government making these decisions and no ability to leave. Here's what we don't know. How many lives this will cost before someone in Washington decides the price is too high. Whether the Cuban government breaks or whether the United States quietly redefines what winning looks like. And whether the suffering of 11 million people eventually becomes, in the cold language of foreign policy, an acceptable cost. At what point does economic pressure become collective punishment? That line exists somewhere. And I want to know where you think it is. Drop it in the comments. This community has been sharper than most analysts on every chapter of this story, and I want to hear your read on where this one ends. If this gave you something the headlines didn't, hit like right now. 1 second. It's the most direct way to make sure this reaches someone who needs it. I cover this story every single day, not weekly, not when it trends. Every day. Subscribe so you don't get left behind when the next chapter breaks, because it won't wait. I'm here. Stay informed.